name is Hannah, and the topic of this presentation is PABE, Prevent Abuse, Become Educated. The main focus of this presentation is learning how to recognize some of the subtle signs of emotional abuse in relationships. This presentation was created by Bonnie Hypes. She has an English education degree and received extensive training from working with non-for-profits. She also has read numerous books on this topic, attended a focus group, had conversations with best-selling authors, and counseled many friends. Altogether, this has provided her with a wealth of knowledge along the way. However, she feels that her own personal experiences by far have been her best teacher. Her passion is to educate young people so that they can make informed choices long before getting too deep in a relationship, when it is much more difficult to get out. Although anyone can benefit from this presentation, the target audience is 13 to 23. And since we are videotaping it, Bonnie thought that someone closer to that age should present it. Personally, I am a wife, mother of 3 boys, a speaker, and author of a book titled The Hands, along with other children's books currently being developed. I am here today from the perspective of someone with very little, if any, knowledge about abuse. My hope is that you, and then ultimately your family and friends, will utilize this information for the greater good of society. Are there any questions before we get started? There are a lot of resources and material on domestic violence and very little on how to prevent it. As you all know, we have relationships with a lot of people in our lives, boyfriends and girlfriends, friends, parents, siblings, teachers, coaches, employers, and so on. Spending time with these people means that we will have to interact with them on a daily basis. We need to be aware of the dynamics involved when these relationships are becoming unhealthy for us. Unless you decide to be in total isolation on a deserted island, we simply can't escape this reality. So it's very important for all of us to explore those beginning subtle signs when we may be placing ourselves in vulnerable situations that can become destructive to us over a period of time. We need to learn how to keep our voice and not lose our personal power as best we can, given our own individual set of circumstances, of course. That way, we can remain empowered to make good decisions for ourselves throughout our entire lives. Although the focus of this presentation is mainly on dating relationships, it can apply to any relationship. With that said, I need to share a few things about domestic violence before we get to those early, subtle warning signs. What I will be doing throughout this presentation is give you the answers to the questions on the survey if you want to follow along. Domestic violence of all types, whether it be financial, physical, verbal, spiritual, or emotional, is all about power and control. So the answer to question number 1 is A, true. The perpetrator or abuser uses weapons from an arsenal at their disposal to get his or her way and put you in a position of inferiority. Not only does the abuser exhibit controlling behavior and an abnormal use of power, the abuse itself can be very deceptive and quite misleading. Someone you know and trust could be treating you in a harmful, injurious, or offensive way. The answer to question number 2 is E, all of the above. It may even be someone you love. Does anyone know how many women are victims of domestic violence in the U.S.? The correct answer to number 3 is B. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence during her lifetime. Statistics for teenagers is even more alarming, where 1 out of 3 teenagers are victims of domestic violence. Domestic violence is the 3rd leading cause of homelessness among families, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Domestic violence is the leading cause of injury to women between the ages of 15 and 44 in the U.S., more than car accidents, muggings, and rapes combined. Domestic violence is a learned behavior, and no, it doesn't just happen to women. The answer to question number 4 is B, false. However, women account for 85% of the victims of intimate partner violence, while men account for approximately 15%. Sadly, this data only shows one side of the problem because most cases of domestic violence are unreported. One study found that 90% of abusers do not even have criminal records, and that abusers are generally law-abiding citizens outside the home. And I don't want to ignore men here. Men are victims of nearly 3 million physical assaults in the USA each year. However, women are at a huge disadvantage. Why? Unlike the very few women like these in the UFC Ultimate Fighting Championship, most men have a higher percentage of lean muscle mass than women. The answer to question number 5 is A, true. Studies have proven again and again that men have a greater amount of skeletal muscle than women. In one such study that examined muscle mass published in the Journal of Applied Physiology, researchers determined that men had an average of 73 pounds of muscle compared to 46 pounds found in women. The men had 40% more muscle mass in the upper body and 33% more in the lower body. As far as the physiological impact is concerned, Lundy Bancroft points out in his book, Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men, that, and I quote, men typically experience women's shoves or slaps as annoying and infuriating rather than intimidating, so the long-term emotional effects are less damaging. It is rare to find a man who has gradually lost his freedom or self-esteem because of a woman's aggressiveness. Immediately following the videotape incident of domestic violence in 2014 involving Ray Rice, a lot of men commented on blogs that they actually thought Ray was justified in hitting his then fiancée, simply because she had slapped him first. In case you don't know, Ray was a professional football player with the Ravens who hit his later wife so hard that she banged her head against the railing in an elevator, knocking her unconscious. Thanks to the #MeToo movement in 2017, these related topics have received a lot of attention. To reiterate the psychological impact of domestic violence, it just isn't the same for men as it is for women. The answer to question number 6 is B, false. Bancroft points this out more poignantly when he states that in all the years I've worked with abusive men, I've never met a man who had lost his self-esteem from an abusive partner. I'm sure that it happens, but it is definitely rare. Mr. Bancroft has spent 20 plus years working with well over 1,000 abusers directly as an intervention counselor in the judicial system. So why would emotional abuse affect men and women so differently? Because by design, we are made differently. Not all of us, of course, but certainly most of us. The personal qualities associated with most women are emotional, relational, communicative, talkative, nurturing. Anything else? How about for men? Analytical, compartmentalized, task-oriented, etc. So most of us women are quite different than guys in a number of ways. On a retreat, I learned that men only use approximately 5,000 words a day versus 25,000 for women. Let's face it, most guys usually don't have as many relationships as women do, and they sure don't want to talk about their feelings or what so-and-so was wearing last night. Did you know that researchers discovered the average man and woman only share 10% of their personality traits? Again, keep in mind that this is true for most of us. Of course, there are always exceptions. There's a funny clip about the differences between men's and women's brains by Mark Gungor on YouTube that's hilarious. We'll try and play a portion of it for you now. We are different, and that's a good thing, most of the time. Life would get pretty boring if we were all the same. But what happens when you enter into an intimate relationship with another person who has an abusive mentality? By intimate, I mean someone who is close with you and with whom you share things about yourself which you probably wouldn't share with a stranger. I doubt that anyone would think it would be okay for this person to, the question number 7 is A, minimize, discount, or trivialize your legitimate feelings whenever you try to express them, or simply withdraw from you whenever things didn't go his way. What if this person had just said or done something that humiliated or embarrassed you? Maybe you felt like he or she was disproportionately angry over something, or even accused you of something that you didn't know is true. For the sake of simplicity here, I will primarily be using the pronoun he when referring to the abuser, but he can certainly be interchangeable to she if the situation warrants. And as we get more into some of the examples, I will go back and forth. Regardless, we all need to learn about emotional abuse so that we can be aware of it. Abuse comes in a lot of forms, and not all of it is as blatant as what you hear on the news when someone has been arrested. Most abusers look just like everyone else. They don't have signs on their foreheads that read, "Beware of abuser." So the answer to question number 8 is A, no. Neither do they usually knock you across the room on your first date. Most of us would never have another date with a person like that. There is no stereotypical abuser. They come in every race, ethnic group, and socioeconomic status. People often wonder why others abuse, and while there are a few predictors, it can get very complicated. The answer to question number 9 is D, all of the above. People become abusers for a myriad of reasons, mostly due to personality traits, the environment where they grow up, as far as whether they witness abuse in their own homes, the role models they had, and our societal culture as a whole, including media, music, and movies. But make no mistake about it, the answer to question number 10 is C, our behavior is our own choice. With that said, I want to emphasize that the abuser was once a victim too. My goal is to prevent yet another person from becoming one. Or maybe you want to stay in the relationship but need to learn how to put up a boundary. Stay well or leave well. Either way, you don't have to become a victim. There is no profile as far as who might be targeted as a victim, either because abusers don't discriminate. The answer to question number 11 is A, true. Having some type of intimate relationship is the only criteria, so it can literally happen to anyone. But those closest to the abuser make the best candidates. The answer to question 12 is B. And while everybody else may see him as charming, his underlying all about me narcissistic personality type may be well concealed from others. Maybe you will see Mr. Wonderful at first too. But most abusers are very angry people on the inside, and this anger surfaces over a period of time. That's why you need to allow enough time to get to know a person you're spending time with. The real persona hidden underneath will eventually emerge over time. Perpetrators or abusers lack the characteristics found in the other answers stated in question number 12. Compassion, empathy, and sympathy. The answer to question 13 is B. Abuse causes anger. An abuser has an abusive problem which may lead to the ways in which he displays his anger. A person doesn't have anger issues and then becomes an abuser. As Mr. Bancroft states, when people conclude that anger causes abuse, they are confusing cause and effect. Abusers carry attitudes that produce fury. He also states that the scars from mental cruelty can be as deep and long-lasting as wounds from punches or slaps, but are often not as obvious. In fact, among women who have experienced physical violence from a partner, half or more report that the man's emotional abuse is what is causing them the greatest harm. The answer to question 14 is A. Although emotional abuse doesn't always lead to physical abuse almost always precedes and is accompanied by emotional abuse. So let's take a look at the progress of abuse timeline.
They're both pretty bad.
Obviously, it's not an exact science, but the order I would put them in is up on the slide. Thank you for your participation. I want you to look at this list and answer this question for yourself. Where does domestic violence begin? Why? Here's what you need to know. Whether the abuse affects you internally or externally, it is all deemed domestic violence. As a reminder, internal damage from emotional abuse can last longer and cause even greater harm than external damage from physical abuse. Looking at this list again, at what point in the timeline do you think that abuse has gone from emotional, more difficult to detect, to verbal, what you can hear or name? To me, verbal abuse begins at number 4, with name calling. How about from verbal to physical? I think that physical abuse begins at number 7, with throwing things. And finally, at what point do you think the abuse goes from covert, subtle, able to cover it up under the radar, to overt, blatant, out there, obvious? Probably at number 4. Patricia Evans focuses on emotional and verbal abuse in her book titled The Verbally Abusive Relationship. She states that abuse is hurtful, insidious, and unpredictable. If someone came up behind you when you weren't looking and scared you, you would be startled. More than likely, you would be caught off guard because you didn't expect it. And since you didn't anticipate it, you weren't prepared for it. Emotional abuse is a lot like that. I want everyone to look at this progression of abuse timeline one more time. What number corresponds to your line of tolerance? What if you were unfamiliar with the subtle signs and perhaps didn't even realize that you were being emotionally abused? That's why education is so crucial. Learning what it means to keep our voices, becoming empowered to take a stand, and accepting personal responsibility for our own well-being hinges on our understanding of what is going on around us. No one wants to be at number 8 or number 9 and then realize that you are in an abusive relationship. The more you are subjected to it, by the way, the more those lines of tolerance become blurred between emotional abuse, verbal abuse, and physical abuse. So, we are going to focus the rest of the time we have together on taking a closer look specifically at emotional abuse and what we can do when we encounter it. There are a lot of behaviors that constitute emotional abuse. Let me suffice to say that I truly believe emotional abuse is the underlying issue in most relationships today. Patricia Evans lists specific categories and characteristics of abuse in her book, so it is a very good resource. She describes the abuser as living in reality, and the victim she calls the partner living in reality too. They see life from very different perspectives. The partner sees life as it is actually, while the abuser sees things from a distorted perception. This means that he perceives events in an abnormal way. Basically, you are not dealing with the person who is thinking the same way that you do. Hence, the answer to question number 15 is B. The problem lies in the way an abuser thinks, which is called abusive mentality. That's what is wrong in an abusive relationship. Emotional abuse defies all logic and rational thought. According to the Everything Self-Hypnosis book, this skewed way of thinking derives from the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind encompasses 95% of the brain, whereas conscious mind encompasses only 5%. The answer to question 16 is B. Doesn't that sound strange? To help simplify it for you, most of our lives are lived from our subconscious. In other words, we don't have to give a lot of thought to most of what we do, other than school, which is probably why it's so hard for us to focus on 5% of your brain all day long. But it also explains why it's so hard to break a bad habit. Again, you have to bring that 5% into full awareness and focus on that alone. No wonder it's so hard to stop biting your nails, or even worse, quit smoking. This might also help further explain why a child who grows up with the qualities and exposure in question number 9, personality, environment, and society, becomes an abuser. It's what they know. And it's from this mindset that the emotional abuser grants himself permission to say and do whatever it takes in order to maintain his sense of entitlement. And what exactly is he entitled to? He doesn't have to take any responsibility for his hurtful words and actions. There's very few, if any, consequences, and there's absolutely no accountability. Not only do abusers often think they are not even being abusive, they also have this added luxury of living a life of privilege by saying and doing whatever they want in the relationship. In my opinion, this is why emotional abusers keep abusing and rarely change. Why would they? Make no mistake about it though, there is absolutely nothing wrong with how the victim feels in an abusive relationship. Will the 2 people selected for the skit come forward now?